The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to another episode of In Conversation with Alethia. I'm your host, Alethia O'Hara-Stephenson. In each episode, I sit down with amazing individuals from our community who are doing inspiring things. The show will educate, it will empower, and it will inspire you. On this episode, I am honored to have the amazing, the talented Captain Kevin Junor from the Canadian Armed Forces with us. We'll talk about the No. 2 Construction Battalion, but before we get into the No. 2 Construction Battalion, I'd love to dive into your history, Captain Junor. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be back again.
Yes, this is the second time that you've been on In Conversation with Alethia.
Yes.
Wonderful.
First time we sat here and you wowed me with your knowledge and you introduced me to everybody, and now I'm back to continue the conversation. Amazing,
and that's what we do. We aim to educate, so it's absolutely amazing to have you back almost a year later.
Yes.
So the first time that you were on the show, we talked about your amazing and highly decorated career with the Canadian Armed Forces and Correctional Services. But today our focus is on the No. 2 Construction Battalion. But as I said, I'd love our viewers to get to know a little bit more about you as the captain, as an individual, before we dive into the No. 2. So when I looked at your bio, I noticed that you have, I don't know, hey, listen, we have to give credit where credit is due and give you your flowers.
All right.
So you've got some amazing achievements, and most notably, beside your name, some decorations. So you've got MMM and CD. What do those stand for?
MMM is a member of the Order of Military Merit.
Wow.
And to put it in perspective, there's a chart where you see the Order of Canada. Mm-hmm. This is, I believe, about 2 away from that. So it's really the highest award you can get in the military outside of being in a combat zone.
Oh, wow. That's impressive. And CD?
CD is Canadian Forces Decoration. So after serving 12 years in the military, then you'll get the CD. And for every additional 10 years, you get a bar on your CD. Amazing. So we already know that you served more than 12 years, so we won't tell all your secrets, but you have a long history with the Canadian Armed Forces, correct? Yes. I joined for the summer, and it's a long summer.
Well, you're obviously having fun, because here you are decades later, and not only that, but you've been able to impact and inspire changes throughout Canada, throughout the military, when it comes to especially recognizing our Black veterans. And that's the topic of conversation today, talking about the No. 2 Construction Battalion. Can you just give us a little bit about the No. 2, their history, how they got started, and what they're all about, please?
And No. 2 is a very interesting story. We coined that as Canada's best kept secret.
Wow.
Senator Calvin Ruck, he wrote a book about No. 2, and after he did the research. So imagine World War I broke out, and Canadians, men, decided we want to fight for Canada. And it was like, come on in, and if you didn't fight, then it would be like, why are you not fighting?
Right.
Black men stepped forward and said, we want to fight. And they were literally told, no. And the reason is you're black.
Wow.
It was even stated that it's a white man's war, so you're not welcome.
Wow.
So you can imagine these men went back home distraught.
Absolutely.
And they found their voice. They started to talk to the right people, talk to the government, talk to the community, and other community activists actually joined with them. And eventually, the British said they wanted a construction battalion, right? Mainly for the Forestry Corps. So Canada established 2 construction battalions. The first construction battalion, which was all white.
Wow. Okay.
And then we had number 2 construction battalion, which is all black. The interesting piece about number 2 is all the soldiers were black, but all the leadership were white, except for one person, which was the chaplain.
Okay.
Right? And you know, within black community,
Yes.
you've got to have the minister there.
Absolutely.
So Reverend White was the chaplain for number 2 construction battalion. So here we have, finally, they were accepted into the military, but they weren't given rifles like everybody else, right? They were given axe, shovels,
Right.
so that they could do everything else but fight.
Wow. Wow. Now, you touched, I want to go back to that point, but you touched on the fact that none of the leaders were black except for the chaplain.
Right.
I'm sure those white leaders would have experienced some pushback and some challenge having to be able to lead the number 2, this all black battalion. Do you have any background on their experience?
The offer was made to other individuals to lead this unit, and they said no. And Lieutenant Colonel Sutherland, he stepped forward, and when they asked him, he goes, "Yes, I'll do it." So you can imagine what he was called at the time.
Absolutely,
Right?
yes.
So it wasn't pleasant for him, and he stood up for his men. He stood up for the soldiers, and made sure that, to the best that he could, they got treated as well as possible. It was also interesting that once they went overseas, they didn't have the number required to be a battalion. So they were downgraded to a company.
Oh, wow.
Right? So as a company, the commander is a major and not a lieutenant colonel. But Lieutenant Colonel Sutherland, he decided that I'm not going to leave my soldiers. So he took a demotion.
Really?
To stay with them, right? So here's an individual who went overseas with his battalion of black men, and once they were gonna bring them down from battalion to a company, he said, "I'm with them," right? So
Wow.
although racism was prevalent, it's not everybody that was like that. And Lieutenant Colonel Sutherland proved that, he's saying, "I'm a leader."
Absolutely.
Right.
And I guess that's the first form of allyship that we're able to see, in the First World War.
Yes.
Incredible.
And again, from a Canadian perspective, the decision was made that if you're going to be accepted into your unit, it is up to the commanding officer, right? So commanding officers across Canada saw black men and said, "We don't want you."
Right. Wow.
Right? But he accepted the task to lead a battalion of black men.
Wow.
God bless him.
Yes, absolutely, because here we are talking about them.
Yes.
Right, incredible. Now, you mentioned that once the battalion was deployed overseas, their numbers decreased. Was that because of just sickness or?
Well, there were a number of reasons. One, they barely had enough for a battalion before they left here, right? Some members were left behind for a number of reasons.
Right.
And once they got there, people, not all would be healthy when they got to Britain,
Right.
and from Britain to France. So the numbers dwindled, and again, if you're looking at an all-black unit, there weren't too many white people that were saying, "I want to fill the ranks."
Right.
Understanding that the way that it works for the military is when you lose soldiers for whatever reason, you replenish them with others that
Absolutely.
are in the area. We didn't have black men that were there to fill the gap that now exists because of whatever reason why these individuals left.
Wow. And now, these men, so they were based out of, is it Halifax, Nova Scotia?
They train in Pictou, Nova Scotia.
Okay.
Right, and you can see the monument that's there.
But I think one of the things that's also key about this battalion is that not only were they trained in Pictou, but they were members from right here in Ontario and other provinces, and of course from the Caribbean as well. Can you speak to some of that and how they were able to include individuals not just in Nova Scotia?
The interesting thing about the recruitment for number 2 is, if memory serves me correct, they were the only unit that did recruitment across Canada.
Ah,
right?
Amazing.
Because if you looked at a traditional unit, you could recruit from your geographical location. But here you didn't have enough black men, or you had black men that wanted to serve in different areas of Canada. So here's an opportunity for them to say, come on in, form the battalion. So you had men from across Canada, from the United States and the Caribbean.
Wow.
That came in. And being a Jamaican man,
of course,
there were those that came from Jamaica, from other areas in the Caribbean.
Amazing. I love that. And shout out to Jamaica and all of the amazing men that volunteered. You touched on the chaplain. I'd love to dive into his background a little bit more. What role did he play other than being that minister? And I know typically the chaplain, or any church leader in the Black community brings the community together. What else did he do for the battalion? From
a recruiting perspective, Reverend White played a crucial role, because when men were fighting and said, well, we didn't want to join an all-black unit, he was that one that was the voice of reason. And he was very involved in the recruitment process, right? So, you go to church, and the minister is saying, here's some opportunities. So he was involved in being the minister, but also recruiting and guiding the individuals as they joined. And as they transition from being at home with family to being in the military and going overseas.
Wow, that's a huge role, right? Just as important as, the Lieutenant Sutherland was, here the chaplain's role is probably even more important in getting the men to come together and even just to participate.
Yeah, Lieutenant Colonel Sutherland, as a commanding officer, now he will do all the leadership required, ensure the training, ensure the strategic direction is met. But the soft skills that is required as a chaplain to be able to make sure that, if Private James got a letter from home and things aren't going well, he would be the person to sit down with them and, do that counseling and make sure that the guidance is there.
That's incredible.
Because if a soldier gets a letter and they're upset, all they want to do is go back home.
Yes.
Right? You're in Britain, you're in France, you can't just walk home.
Right.
So they still have to be effective to get their job done. So it was interesting for that time that you had a chaplain that could relate to them and actually provide the advice, the guidance for them, and also to the commanding officer.
Love it.
So the commanding officer can deal with them in a way that it's leadership and not management.
Perfect.
Right.
On that note, please pause. We're going to take a short break. And when we return with Captain Kevin Junor, we're going to talk about the connection between the No. 2 Construction Battalion in Nova Scotia and right here in the town of Shelburne. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
watching Rogers TV.
Welcome back to In Conversation with Alethia. I'm in the studio with Captain Kevin Junor of the Canadian Armed Forces. So welcome back, Kevin. Now, we left off talking about the role that the chaplain played with connecting the troop with, Lieutenant Sutherland, and how critical that role was to make sure that, there's continuity and all that great stuff with the military. Now I want to transition into the connection between Nova Scotia and the town of Shelburne, Ontario, not yes. Shelburne, Nova Scotia. So in November of 2021, the town of Shelburne recognized these men for their significant contributions in the war, First World War. And so they recognized them by erecting a plaque in the community gardens to honor these men. And fast forward to this year, 2023, you and I were able to travel to Nova Scotia to participate in the 30th Remembrance Ceremony honoring these men. Can you talk about that ceremony and what that ceremony is all about and some of the activities that led up to the ceremony, in particular the apology?
The ceremony happened in Pictou, Nova Scotia. And in Pictou, Nova Scotia, they still had a clause or a law where black men were not allowed to walk on the street after certain hours in the evening, right? So imagine that, and you've got soldiers that are training there. Yeah. So the ceremony, the 30th celebration in Pictou was significant this year, in which it was also the first anniversary of the apology.
Wow.
So let me back up.
Yes, please.
On July 9th, 2022, the Prime Minister of Canada stood on the grounds in Truro, Nova Scotia, where the men actually trained, and the photograph that people see of the battalion, it was taken there.
Wow.
On the grounds where the Prime Minister stood and apologized. Leading up to the apology, there was a National Apology Advisory Committee, and I was blessed to be a member of that team. It comprised of members of the community from across Canada, and also leaders of the Canadian Army. We had Mr. Russell Gross, who is the Executive Director of the Black Cultural Center of Nova Scotia, Lieutenant Barry Pitcher, who is the leader that was identified by the Canadian Army to partner with Russell. So both of them were co-leaders for the National Apology Advisory Committee.
That's amazing. And I think it's important to note, again, when we talk about allyship, the role that Barry Pritchard played in making this apology happen. We've got Barry, who is someone who identified, I believe, as white.
Yes.
And you've got Russell, who is someone from a descendant of Nova Scotia from the Black community, being able to come together as part of the committee. So again, powerful testament and demonstration of allyship and the importance of recognizing Canada's full history.
Exactly. And you know, the Lieutenant Colonel and Russell worked very well with the Minister's office, right? And ensure that the national, what we call the NAC, the NAC was able to consult with descendants, with the community, and with the military. So we had a number of consultation sessions with people across the country, actually international. So we had people from the States, people from the Caribbean that were able to call in and provide advice and guidance. So we're asking questions like, why is this important? What what does the apology mean to you? What are some of the things that you want to hear in the apology? And from that, we submitted a report to the Minister of National Defense. And that report also was used to advise the Prime Minister as to, you know, we don't want you to come up there and just say some nice words, right? We want, first of all, we want the Prime Minister to make the apology and not just the minister, because the Prime Minister is a leader of the government.
Absolutely.
Right? So there were some key messages that we looked at. And one of them was, you know, we want to hear that we're apologizing for the anti-black racism that these men endured, right? We want to hear the apology that this happened and it's wrong, right? They were treated improperly, and that there are actions that will be taken to make sure that it is rectified. And not only that, but the story of number 2 should be told and not just thrown away in the corner.
Absolutely.
Right? I must confess that as I sat there and I heard the Prime Minister talking, initially I wasn't impressed because I was hearing those nice flowery words.
Yep.
But then the words that we wanted came out when he said, I'm apologizing for the anti-black racism that they felt. I'm apologizing on behalf of all Canadians for the treatment that they had in life and in death.
Yes.
Because remember, when they came back, they weren't given the reception like other soldiers, right? They were just basically put out in the corner and disbanded. So the fact that the Prime Minister was able to speak about all of those things and apologize about that, those were the things that, on a personal note, that's what I looked for, and that's what I heard. And you know, there were approximately 2,000 people that were there. Not to mention the people that were chiming in via social media,
Absolutely.
right, or live streaming. So it was great that that happened. So if we now go forward a year to the ceremony where we were there.
Yeah, before you even go to the the ceremony this year, I believe there were some descendants of the number 2 construction battalion who were present to hear the apology in person. Can you touch on that experience?
So one of my role was to be the liaison between the military and the direct descendants. And direct descendants were either spouse or children of the members of number 2. So we, at that point, identified about 19 members, and we had 15 that were there directly.
Powerful.
Right? So we had them sitting in a place of honor. We had them sitting in a place where, for one of the member, it was actually her birthday on the day of the apology. So she was put right beside the Prime Minister.
Incredible.
Right?
What an honor.
And, you know, the apology went directly to them. There was one member that came in from out west, and not only did he have the experience of his dad experiencing racism, but he also lived in Africville.
Wow.
And to have both the racism of number 2 and the racism of Africville, he was in poor health, and his son said he took him to Africville where he sat, and he wept for a little bit.
Wow.
And his son went on to say his dad said, I'm okay to go now.
Wow.
You know,
Chills.
He was alive to hear the apology, and he was able to go back to Africville and sat there for a moment. So the government did this right.
Yes.
They did
Absolutely.
it right. And now, not all the direct descendants were able to be there, but those that were there and other descendants were given a position of honor where they could sit. And they were all given a a medallion to commemorate that day that the government apologized to the descendants.
That's incredible. And, thank you for your leadership and all of the committee members to make this a reality, because again, as a Black woman, I feel a certain weight lifted off just by that apology. And it's not only that, but it's recognizing the role that these men played in shaping Canada, right? It was not just about going off to war, even though they weren't able to fight, but they persevered. They demonstrated courage and leadership and excellence in all that they did while overseas. So this was significant.
And if we also look this year, for going back, a stamp was made for them.
Incredible.
And this year there's a coin that was made for them. So again, the right things are being done, but there's still a lot more to be done.
Yes.
Right? It's great to have the coin or the stamp, but now we need to make sure that people are properly educated.
Absolutely.
Right? So that starts in the school to make sure that we have this embedded in the curriculum. Ensure that this is entwined in the Canadian history.
Yes, that's the key.
Right.
I love that. I love that. Now, when you and I had the chance to participate in the ceremony in PIC2, one of the things that was significant was the fact that the town of Shelburne recognized the work that community leaders, DCCBA, is doing in the community to honor these men. And they provided me with a letter to be able to give to the executive director of Nova Scotia, talking about, again, the work that we're doing here, carrying on the education and making sure that these men are recognized. But above and beyond that, again, you were able to participate in that ceremony, I believe, more than once, to recognize these men. Can you talk about that experience and, again, the significance and importance of carrying on the tradition and recognizing and celebrating these men?
A couple of things on that. One, there was a flag that was designed for number 2, and they had the initial flag raising on July 5th, I believe it was, in Gagetown, New Brunswick, where the 4 ESR, Engineer Support Regiment, is now perpetuating number 2 Construction Battalion.
Amazing.
So the 4 ESR as an engineering regiment now have the opportunity and have the mandate to make sure that the story of number 2 Construction Battalion is told.
I love that.
Right.
And you know what? We're going to end the show on that note, talking about the flag that was established for the number 2 Construction Battalion and the role that these individuals are now playing to carry on the legacy and continuing the education of the number 2 Construction Battalion. So thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for talking about the number 2 Construction Battalion and the significant contribution that they played in Canada's history, the First World War, and the legacy that they have left behind.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and hopefully I'll come back again.
Absolutely. We'll have to find another topic to talk about next time. This has been another amazing episode of In Conversation with Alethia. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Everybody knows not to drink and drive, but some people still think it's okay to take drugs and drive. Police have the authority, the ability, and the